Thank you very much. So what I want to talk about here is to sort of take it back a little bit more towards what Jeff was talking about, but also linking what Alvin was talking about as well. So the LSE is, as most people know, one of the sort of leading institutions in the world when it comes to economics and political science, global leading research. What it doesn't have, and one of its great challenges, is that its educational experience for its 10,500 students is actually fundamentally not particularly good. Measured with what is probably a relatively inaccurate measure, which is the National Student Survey in the UK, we are at the bottom of the National Student Survey. Our students don't enjoy their educational experience. They do it through gritted teeth because at the end of the day, they get an excellent job. So, that was the challenge and environment that we were working in. So what we looked at more particularly is that the solution to this isn't technology. The solution to this is actually understanding the differences between old and new learning and how learning has changed and how technology has changed disciplines, how technology has changed the way people share, how technology has changed the way people communicate, and how technology has changed the way people create and make. And these were fundamental challenges because, as Jeff quite rightly pointed out, this is the stuff that's locked in curricula. It's the way people learn that's locked in curricula. I'll do it that way, that's easy. That's right. So there's a wonderful piece by Gutierrez from 2014, and they talk a lot about what some of these shifts in learning actually look like. I mean, we are moving from individual to collaborative learning, and that exists in a standard face-to-face classroom where we ask a student to talk to each other. Collaborative assessment, group work, and those kind of things. We're asking students to move from very passive reception of learning to a much more active learning base. Make something for us, construct knowledge, show us you've got a demonstrable example that you've learnt something. The rise of differentiated instruction, that the lecture tutorial model is breaking down. I mean, yes, you mentioned Bly, you can go to Gibbs, and Gibbs wrote a piece about the 50 reasons why the lecturer is dead, and he wrote that in the 1980s. He still puts it out every year because it hasn't died. But there is a rise of differentiated models of instruction and how people teach and learn. And then there's that phenomenon of multitasking, that idea that, you know, when I did my university education, I studied 18 weeks a semester for 18 hours a week doing 6 courses. Your average student now at undergraduate level does 4 courses in 8 hours. So they are multitasking. They've got more time to multitask, but you're expecting more of them outside of the classroom than was ever expected in generations previous. So I want to talk about how to do this in a positive way. And I'm going to rapidly race through 3 particular things that we've done and just give 3 brief examples of that. And they are, it all works from the middle out and it doesn't matter what's in their hands. So let's start with it all works. One of the critical things to point out is a lot of people say the thing about when you make change in education is, oh, it just doesn't work. I tried it, it didn't work. It was failed. You know, or my mate tried it and it didn't work. And the example they always use is this stuff, the stuff you present from. Oh yeah, I remember standing in front of 400 people at a lecture theatre and I pressed a button and it didn't work. So I'm just not going to do it again. That's it, done. The reality is the technology works. It may not be as reliable as picking up a phone and knowing that it's going to be a dial tone at the end of the phone, but it does all work. So a piece of work we did this year with David White from the University of Arts London was a hack we called "The Future is Not Digital" because of the very small text at the bottom. That had already happened. And the idea is that we're not talking about information and the changes in learning in terms of potential. These are things that have actually already fundamentally happened. And disciplines have shifted. I mean, even the most, as Alvin mentioned, the traditional discipline of economics has been transformed by technology, yet that hasn't necessarily represented itself in the teaching of it. So for us, this was about being in the right rooms with the right people saying the right things. Because at the end of the day, you can approach this in really simple ways and talk to academics and say, would you like to come along with the journey? And as Jeff said, you've also got to have the institutional buy-in at the top. But it is actually being that you're not the person throwing the sort of, you know, thing from the ball from outside, hoping that you hit someone. That you're in the discussions at a curricular level, at an institutional strategy level, at a teaching and learning level, at a student advocacy level, at a widening participation level. You are in all of those discussions at the right time. And we just came up with 4 basic headlines that were around that. Enable success through an agile approach to technology and teaching. This is not something that universities are particularly good at. We lock things in virtual learning environments. We lock things in technology. We are massively behind the scale in terms of the speed at which we can react to technological changes. That we believe digital practice is central to delivering an institution's mission, and without digital practice, you cannot deliver what a university stands for. That institutional pedagogical change is informed by research. We don't do this because this is cool shit. We do this because this is what is good for teaching and learning. And we know it because we've researched it and we understand it. And that we use digital data and analytics, as Jeff pointed out, to support the core values and make it sustainable. Because we don't want it to be a MOOC. In some ways, MOOCs have had their peak, they'll find their level, but we don't want the institution constantly reacting to trend. We want it to be thinking about this in a strategic level. The next one I want to talk about briefly is called leading change from the middle out. We've heard a lot, and in fact the session talks about top-down, bottom-up and top-down. The trouble with bottom-up is you never get enough people bottom-up to actually shift the entire institution. If you go top-down, yes, you need that institutional buy-in, but you have the risk that the people feel they're being done to, not being done with. So we came up with this model of middle out, which was effectively working with people who can provide particular levels of stimulus, scale, impact and connection. The example I want to give is a wonderful academic called Professor Bill Callahan. He does a course in international relations. When he inherited it, it's called Visual International Politics. When he inherited it, it was assessed by 4 sight unseen final exam essays. That was it, for a course in visual international politics. He said that is absolutely patently ludicrous. So how do I fix this? So he came to us and said, what I'd like to do is make documentary films. Can you help us make documentary films? Of course we can. We understand digital storytelling, we understand narrative filmmaking, we've got some of the technological knowledge, but we also have an understanding of how to make that work in an educational environment. And we just gave the students cameras and editing stuff and say, go away and do your best. And we talked to them about, you know, what do you like in film? And we built up their literacy about these things. What was brilliant about that, aside from the fact that this got our students jobs in the UN because they could actually tell the UN they knew how to tell about knowledge, we now have 9 other projects running very similarly. We have a research group in visual international politics. We've had a conference. We've got PhD students. Why? Because the man who ran that told all of his colleagues, I'm doing it. He was the right person because he was able to have the impact and the stimulus that came from the middle. He was, sure, one person, you think about that bottom up, but he was the right one person. And it's about picking the right one person. And finally, this is a thing I've been riffing off a little bit in the last couple of months. At the end of the day, it actually doesn't matter what is in the student's hands. It doesn't matter if it's a laptop, it doesn't matter if it's a phone. None of that actually matters for 2 reasons. One, these things particularly, and we did some work on a project called LSE 2020 where we asked our students what they thought teaching and learning would be like in 5 years' time with technology. Every single one of them could not talk about a piece of technology despite the fact they had a laptop, an iPad and a phone right in front of them. They weren't talking about them as technology because they're not technology. They're instruments that they use in a regular day, like a backpack and clothes. And that's not universal. I totally buy that. I'm not going to get into the whole argument that every student is equipped with this set of knowledges. They're not. And there is a role for us to support the growth of literacies of students across a wide variety of technologies and practices. But the point of this slide is not to talk about the piece of technology that's in their hands. What matters most is simply good teaching. If you do good teaching, then the right technology will come to you. If you do good teaching, students will learn. If you do good teaching, you'll be happy. If you do good teaching, your institution will be very, very happy because its metrics will look better. But at the end of the day, it's all about good teaching. This and this will not make good teaching. It might help. It might make it better. It might make it more interesting. It might make it different. But it won't by itself make good teaching. And that is the core of the process that we've done at the LSE. We've tried to move towards the idea of making an environment where our teachers can be rewarded and feel like they're doing good teaching. Many of them don't know they're doing good teaching. They really don't, until someone sits down with them and has a conversation. We have a set of things on our blog called the Innovators, where we talk to people about doing teaching, about what their teaching philosophy is. And they've never had that conversation before. And it's empowering, and it's massively important. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think you have raised a number of issues which we'll come back to later on.